Welcome to the Vortex Nation podcast, brought to you by lovers of hunting, shooting, public lands, the Second Amendment, and good food. All right, what's up, everybody? We're coming at you with another podcast on the road here at SHOT Show 2019. And by the time you listen to this, chances are, I think we've said this on all the podcasts we've actually recorded here, chances are it's probably going to be sometime in February, maybe even going into March, who knows? But like we said, we get to talk to all kinds of cool people, which is really awesome when we go out to these shows. And we have one very cool person we're going to talk to. Actually, and for the record, I'm doing this solo for the time being. Mark is one very busy man at this show. If he happens to have some time freed up, he's going to try and swing in, so you might hear a bit of bumbling and crashing, and then all of a sudden Mark's voice might join us. But until then, it's Jimmy here and DJ Struntz. Is that how you say it?
That's correct, sir.
And he's with North American Rescue, and it's a really, really cool company, and a lot of the stuff that you guys do is really interesting. We were talking right before this, and we'll have you introduce yourself, of course. We were talking right before this. A lot of what North American Rescue does is keep people alive when stuff goes awry. And this could relate to people in hunting and shooting and tactical, law enforcement, military, darn near anything. It's important stuff to know. So before we go much further, DJ, we'll have you introduce yourself for the listeners out there. Who are you? What do you do? And what are maybe some fun facts about you? Go for it.
My name is DJ Struntz. I'm the Minister of Propaganda for North American Rescue, which basically means I run all our social media platforms. I'm a photographer and kind of came into this world from that background. I'm a civilian who is just, I guess, educated enough to be dangerous in all things related to tactical medicine and that environment. But I spent 15 years as a surfing magazine photographer and grew up hunting and fishing in Northern California. And this kind of evolved out of my career as a surf photographer with some of my travels and working with some of my friends who were special operations. And they introduced me to tactical medicine, which is a fancy way of saying life-saving first aid, not just ouchie boo-boo Band-Aids, but using products that could actually save your life if you were really injured. And that slowly turned into me approaching North American Rescue and saying, hey, as a surf photographer who travels to remote places all over the world, I don't have a first aid kit that matters. Like, you open up one that you buy at an outdoor store, and it's pretty much a bunch of fluff. You have some little gauze pads that say trauma on it, and some Benadryl and
Band-Aids.
Band-Aids, and they're all very useful. You use those, those are the kind of products that you hope people use. But I needed to have some more robust solutions in case one of my surfers got mowed by a shark or lacerated by a fin. And I cold called North American Rescue and said, hey, what do you guys have? And they're like, how do you even know we exist? We just basically sell to the military. And I was like, well, funny you should ask. I have friends that work at MARSOC, and they've given me your product, and I Googled you online and figured out where you were, so I'm calling you now. And that's kind of how it started.
I think when we first got into contact, I remember it was a couple years back, and I don't even remember how exactly it happened, but we got to talking, and we were talking about working together on various different, maybe things going on social media or whatever it might have been. And I think you were even looking to get an optic at one point for your son who was going out hunting. And when you said you were from North American Rescue, I remember thinking in my head, like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, we get hit up by people saying, oh, so do you guys rescue dogs? And you're like, well, we can help you save your dog if they, have an injury. We have products that can address that. Or do you guys rescue, we crashed our motorcycle and we need our motorcycle's broken down. Can you send someone? And
we're you're like a AAA.
Yeah, and we're like, no, we don't do that. So we get some pretty funny inquiries, but we're a product company. The magic of the products really happens in the hands of the end user. And that's what's really fun about my job is I get to work with everyone from soccer moms and Boy Scouts all the way through to Tier 1 medics in our special operations force, and just kind of get to tell some stories of, how people use our products to save lives. And that is a lot more rewarding at this point in my life than chasing surfers to exotic locations.
Really? Yeah. I mean, hey, I can't blame you there. I do think it's really interesting, but going to some exotic surf locations sounds pretty cool.
It was fun. I had a really incredible run. I kind of hit the golden era of surf photography and was fortunate enough to take my photography, I think like 55 different countries. Wow. Kind of got to go everywhere. And most of those locations aren't too painful. Tahiti, Fiji, Indonesia, Australia, keep going. But I think for me with the medical side, it all really started in Yemen because I did a trip to Yemen in 2006, and that was the introduction to the guys from Marine Special Operations, and kind of I didn't realize that my life at that point was going to take the trajectory that it is, and the doors were going to open to move into this world, but. That's just
cool.
The way the good Lord took me.
That's awesome, man. So for kind of this, like you said, life-saving equipment, essentially, I think a lot of people, the only one I had ever heard of before was like a tourniquet.
Yep.
And that's obviously a pretty big deal. I don't if somebody put a gun to my head and asked me to say exactly what it does, I mean, I could kind of say what it does exactly, but I wouldn't be amazing at explaining it. But what's the kind of like full spectrum of stuff that you guys do? What are some of these really important products?
Well, it's all kind of based around stopping traumatic bleeding. Is the
biggest way? Is that like the biggest reason why somebody gets into a very bad situation? Is that they bleed out?
There can be lots of issues. I mean, in the backcountry, could be hypothermia. There can be lots of contributing factors. But one thing as someone that doesn't have a paramedic or EMS background, stopping bleeding really matters. Like, a kid can put their arm through a plate glass window at school. We see cases like that. Or we had a lady who slipped on a glass of wine on the floor out with her girlfriends, and when she fell, the wine glass in her hand lacerated the arteries in her wrist. Ooh. Or a hunter falls out of a tree stand and they land on their broadhead and it goes through their leg. I mean, we see all sorts of different injury patterns. And, trauma is trauma. It doesn't matter if it's caused by a bomb, by a bullet, or by your own dumb self walking into something. Bleeding's bleeding and you want to stop it. And a lot of this stuff, really came from military medicine. It was kind of evolved out of this constant war on terror that we've been going through for the last 17 years. And a lot of those lessons are coming back home and really making a difference in saving lives. We call it from the battlefield to your backyard, basically.
Yeah.
So, a tourniquet is we sell the CAT tourniquet, which is combat application tourniquet. It's a one-handed, you could put it on your own arm, and it's very safe. It doesn't, people have this myth, there's been this kind of pushed idea that if you put a tourniquet on, you're going to lose your arm, you're going to lose your leg. And that's simply not the case. You might lose your arm or leg because of, the trauma that was caused to that limb by whatever mechanism it was. But the tourniquet doesn't cause any issues long-term, especially if we kind of say between 2 and 6 hours, of having a tourniquet in place, no issues whatsoever. And I think there was a helicopter pilot, details might be a little off on the time, but it was somewhere around 18 hours that he had a tourniquet in place, and he's back flying helicopters.
Wow.
So, he had to work through some issues. He had to do some rehab to get the full functionality of that limb back. But it's always, life, limb, or eyesight are big critical factors that you want to save. And
especially on a helicopter pilot, those guys got to be
their hand-eye coordination. I mean, it all.
Heck yeah.
So, we're seeing more and more use of tourniquets on the civilian side. Unfortunately, we're seeing them used in school shootings now. I mean, that's
right.
Heartbreaking. Since I'm involved in our social media, I'm constantly tracking that stuff, and it's like to wake up to a mass casualty at a school is a terrible. None of us ever want to see any of our products ever used in that situation. But we hope that should that situation arise, the responders have the tools that they need to save as many lives as possible.
Yeah, that's a really good note. On the side of the tourniquet, so for somebody, like the idea of a tourniquet is to stop blood from flowing out freely.
Yeah,
and,
from an arterial bleed. So basically, it's a way to squish the muscles and the meat together. Imagine you're just squishing something together, and that direct pressure keeps the blood from coming out of the artery. So it squishes it down, it pinches off those arteries, and stops. It's like turning off a faucet, really. I mean, It's that fast. If somebody's bleeding heavily and squirting bright red blood, and that's arterial blood, when you see that if you're a hunter, you know what arterial blood looks like. You know, that fresh, bright red blood. You want to shut that off as quickly as possible, because from an injury to your femoral artery in your leg, you can bleed out in as short of amount of time as 3 minutes. So
wow.
Yeah, so it's
That
not
is
like
not
you
what
have
I
a
thought
lot
you
of
were
time.
gonna say.
Yeah, so you don't.
Holy smokes, 3 minutes, man.
It's quick.
How quick can a person who's trained at least moderately well with a tourniquet, how quick could somebody apply a tourniquet?
15 to 30 seconds.
Okay.
So fast.
Yeah.
It's really easy. I mean, you know, my little boy has been part of this journey with me. He's been in a lot of our photo shoots. He's our victim. So
yeah, he's played. I remember. It freaks me out sometimes because if you follow DJ on social media, you're just at DJ Struntz, right?
Yeah.
So if you follow him, yeah, like you posted a picture one time and your kid had like blood or it's like fake blood or whatever it is, like all over himself, and I'm like, dude's posting pictures of his kid like almost dead, and then I realized it was for like it was for training.
It was for a SWAT team. Yeah, Jonah was I voluntold Jonah that he was going to be a casualty.
Voluntold, I like that.
And he likes to pretend he hates it, but then he gets there and he wants to tell me how to do the photo shoot. So
yeah,
he's part of the whole family's involved. But he knows how to put a tourniquet on. I mean, kids can put them on. They work on, kids' pediatrics all the way down. I mean, all you need is a 5-inch circumference tube, basically.
Okay.
That's the smallest diameter that a tourniquet will work on. But anything below that, it's such a small diameter, you can literally squish that either with direct pressure or with an emergency trauma dressing, just like almost like an ACE wrap. And it'll act like a tourniquet.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff that goes into tourniquet science, but the bottom line is you just want to stop that bleeding safely. And our tourniquet is, there's only 2 tourniquets that are approved by, they call it the TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty Care.
Okay.
And that's the military's kind of governing body for what the medics are going to be carrying for point of injury stuff. And our tourniquet is the #1 tourniquet for DOD.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them out there, and they're easy to use, and it's something that's really simple. I mean, I have friends now that, they're high school kids and middle school grade. They carry medical products in their backpacks, and it's not necessarily for a school shooting. That's the worst case scenario, but
right.
We see it. Somebody falls on the playground. We had a cat save this last year with a little girl that fell, and the nurse had a tourniquet and used it on her arm. And because she severed her brachial artery when she fell on the playground. I mean,
wow,
accidents happen. It doesn't take an active shooter to
or a battlefield
or a
something,
battlefield.
yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as a car accident or a motorcycle accident, and people are responding and making a difference. It empowers you from being just a bystander with your phone taking photos and turns you into a responder.
Yeah,
and that's, I think, a big.
That's huge. I was fully prepared too in coming into this podcast to kind of look a little bit or sound a little bit like an idiot, because I myself am not fully trained on a lot of this stuff. I don't have a tourniquet, admittedly, and the more I've talked with you, the more I know I should totally learn this stuff. But what do you think, so one, for me, I get a little queasy around other people's blood.
Yep.
I like to rollerblade in my free time in the summers, so I've definitely taken my fair share of spills. This last summer I took one, and my whole side of my right leg was just a giant road rash. And so that doesn't freak me out. But yeah, like being around other people's blood and stuff, like what do you think are some of the barriers that people see when they think about learning some of these things? And what are maybe some myths that actually make it a little bit more approachable?
Yeah, I think the barrier-wise is exactly what you're saying. People get squeamish around blood. I mean, my wife, when she sees one of my kids bleeding, will pass out. And I'm always like, whoa, what is this? I'm like, what happened to those maternal instincts that you told me you were going to have? My little girl cut her face last year, or this last winter, and sure enough, Kate was like laid out on the floor, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to bring you a beverage to calm your nerves. I'm going to take care of the bleeding.
Yeah.
And everybody reacts differently, and I don't think there's an expectation that everyone is going to have that drive to be a responder. I think it's important to have education in it, because I think the more you're exposed, the education takes, for a stop the bleed class will take away a lot of that, like, oh, I'm going to hurt the person, or, yeah, do tourniquets hurt? Absolutely. If I put a tourniquet on, James's leg right now, he would be squealing if I put it on right. I mean,
yeah. Because you cinch those things down.
You have to cinch them down. I mean,
That's the whole
you're
point of
stopping
them.
bleeding.
Yeah.
You cannot just put it on there.
I mean, there's a lot of like the blood, like your blood pressure is capable of pushing through some pretty serious stuff. So yeah, unless you really cinch it down, you have to out muscle blood pressure.
Yeah, so it's about 500 millimeters of mercury pressure.
Yeah. Well, and especially too, I can only imagine that if somebody's hurt, their blood pressure is way spiked.
Yeah, they're not happy, and this, a lot of times makes them unhappier. The best thing about it, though, when you're putting it on someone is to always remember it's not you that's hurting, it's them. So it doesn't hurt you. So
that's true.
You're like, I'm okay. This is going to hurt for you, but it's going to save your life. And you just have to communicate, with people and be like, guess what? Here it comes. And, but that whole education piece is huge because the more you learn about it, the less intimidating it is. And when you realize that it literally could mean the difference in life or death for your family member, for yourself, for a friend, it can help you push through that mental block of, oh, it's gross. I mean,
right.
Although with work with the North American, social media, there's definitely some gross stuff. I mean,
your guys' social media is frequently on Instagram. If you follow them, you frequently have to tap here to see what do they call it, graphic content or whatever.
And I don't post gore to post gore. I get sent so much stuff, and some of it's terrible. Like you can't unsee some of the stuff that I see on a daily basis. It's just people just put in terrible situations, sometimes by themselves, sometimes just by accident, or at the hands of other people, and it's terrible stuff. I try to only showcase that if there's some way that I can use it to teach you, or that person had a good outcome because of the medicine that was done with them. Yeah. So, but it can, it's intense.
It's wild stuff, and a fair amount of the stuff that you guys post, like we've said, it's happening just in like a city,
absolutely.
or it could be anywhere. How long does it take, would you say, in general, somebody to go through the proper training to at least be not a bystander in a traumatic situation like this? To me, it seems like when I look at it and I think about, fixing somebody who's bleeding out or something like that, I mean, I feel like I would need to know a fair amount, but then you're saying at the same time, like there's young kids who carry tourniquets around, understand how to put them on. So
it's not, depends on how much you want to get educated, right? So,
right.
One thing, never stop learning. That's been my goal in my entire life. If I ever get to the point where I think I know it all, then that's just a problem in my own head. That's, because there's no such thing. So, we encourage, coming up in May is the National Stop the Bleed Month, where we are going to be helping push across the entire country Stop the Bleed classes. And those maybe are 2 to 3 hour classes. They're not super in-depth, but it gives you the basic understanding of how to use a tourniquet, how to pack a wound, because tourniquets only work on arms and legs. If you have...
Yeah, so like a chest wound or something like that.
There's all sorts of different tools you can use, but for a basic, off-the-street person, I don't expect them to manage airways and go through higher levels of care, but a basic class will teach you the kind of the tools you need to buy time for first responders to get to you that can provide that higher level of care. I forget the exact figure, but just, in any normal city, the time it takes from when you call 911, hey, I'm bleeding, to the time they show up is going to be longer than 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Unless you live right next door to the fire station. Even then, depends on how it gets paged out, what's happening. So, and if you're in a motor vehicle accident, by the time they get there, establish scene safety, all the rest, if you can intervene in that time, you're buying time for someone's life. Because the moment you start dumping blood, the clock is ticking.
Right.
And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, that was one of the things you brought up, the motor vehicle thing, and it got me thinking. You never want to try and be too much of a. I'd be curious if maybe people that you work with are a little bit like this. Like, I remember back in the day when I'd be growing up with my mom. My mom I always told her that she had the most vivid imagination of anybody I ever knew, because you could be like, I could be walking out to go check the mail, and it was like I wasn't wearing my shoes. And she'd be like, oh, you need to put your shoes on, or else if you don't put your shoes on, you're not going to be used to walking in the barefoot, and you're going to trip over that step, and then your head's going to hit the side view mirror on the door, and you're going to get a concussion, and then you're going to spill and hit the cement floor, and then you hit the cement floor, it cracks your head open, your skull splits and your brain falls out. It always ended up in your brains falling out. I don't know why.
Well, moms are worried about your brains falling out.
Yeah, brains. It's especially over just about everything else. But I don't even remember where I was going with that. But I was saying, like, never want to be a person who's just constantly thinking like
the worst is going to happen.
Yeah, I'm afraid of the world.
We're at SHOT Show. It's like there's a lot of people walking around this place going, I'm going to need an AR because it's going to be the apocalypse.
Right, exactly.
And that turns people off in the general population to some of the medical stuff because they're like, oh, you
just walk around
you're
thinking
just a crazy person that thinks,
like a prepper, that you always think that doomsday is going to happen or you're going to get your arm cut off just because you went to go get a coffee at,
Yeah, and, I even tell this to special operations medics. I'm like, look, I hope you have our products, and I hope they get old and rotten, and you have to buy a new one, but you never use it. I want a bored medic, and right now, downrange, it's been a rough week. Unfortunately, the boys have been having to do a lot of medicine because we've been sustaining losses, and those always break my heart when you see, guys that don't make it home or whatever else. But on the home front, it's just like, yeah, I carry a kit in my car. Mm-hmm. Do I carry a tourniquet on me all the time? I have to admit I don't. Sometimes I'll sneak one in my wife's purse if we're going somewhere just so that I have one around.
Yeah.
And we always tell law enforcement, please carry it on your person. Because law enforcement's different. You're by yourself, you're patrolling, say you're chasing a suspect. If your medical kit or a tourniquet is in the trunk of your car, what good does it do you if you've run 500 yards away from your car chasing a suspect?
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
So there is a reason to keep it on your person. But it's not something that, it's like fear-mongering, I guess. I never want people to be like, oh, it's not that. It's more of an educational thing and just being able to help somebody else, be a good Samaritan,
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I liken it to concealed carrying.
Yeah.
Because when you take the leap into concealed carrying, they always tell you, and it's true. Anybody who is, in my opinion, a responsible concealed carrier, they don't go out there trying to be vigilante, Batman, just look for crime and try and whip out that concealed carry and shoot a bunch of bad guys.
Yeah.
That's not the reason that you concealed carry.
No.
The best situation would be if you never had to use it. I mean, when I say never had to use it, I mean in a defensive situation. You should really, if you're concealed carrying, be using it often in a safe range situation with a safe bat drive, all those things where you're training and making sure you understand how to use it and that your ammo works and all that, and this, that, and the other thing. But it is a lot similar to that. I don't conceal carry every day thinking like, there's a bad guy around that corner and that corner and that corner.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to like always have my hand on my hip. But it's,
But it raises your awareness. I conceal carry. When I always carry med kit because if you carry a gun, you should have, if you can make a hole, you should be able to fix a hole. And
that's a quote right there. We like to pop out some quotes from the podcast. That's a good one.
But it's always that increased awareness. If I'm carrying, I'm more situationally aware than if I'm just relaxed, don't have that uncomfortable piece of metal sticking into my either appendix carrier, whatever. And it's the same thing with the medical. Once you have that training, you're just more aware of what's happening around you. I actually have never put a tourniquet on a person other than in training. Mm-hmm. But after I went through the training, it seemed like all of a sudden stuff was happening around me where I was either calling 911 because I was watching people not do it. Like you'd see a building on fire and you just see cars driving by it, and you assume that somebody's calling 911, right? Because there's a building on fire. Well, I call 911 and they're like, "Oh, no one's reported that." And you're just, that's kind of the apathetic outlook of a lot of people. Oh, it's somebody else's problem.
Somebody else has got it.
Or somebody falls down a set of stairs and has a seizure. Well, if you've gone through some training, at least you can help stabilize that person. That happened to me up in North Carolina in the mountains at some clothing store, and all of a sudden a person was having a seizure on the floor, and everyone was running around not knowing what to do. And I just come out of the med training class. I was like, okay, let's just make sure she has a good airway, keep her in a recovery position. Just basic stuff that you learn. And it wasn't traumatic bleeding, but the training that I had gave me the confidence to be able to at least help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And but then when I'm hunting with my son and we're back in the woods, if something happens, accidents happen. It doesn't have to be an accidental discharge of a firearm.
Yeah.
It's just, people fall out of tree stands, people trip and fall on their face, or you're tracking something, and there's a million different things that could happen. You hope they never do, but at least it gives you a sense of real confidence to be like, okay, I can deal with this and buy myself some time and think clearly when it's kind of chaotic.
Absolutely. And we've heard it, I think I feel like on a previous podcast we mentioned, or it might have been another podcast I was listening to we talked to a lot of hunters, obviously, and some of those places that hunters end up, especially we tend to cater more towards Western hunters, and, there's the Alaskan hunters, and we were just talking to the guys from 60th Parallel. I don't know if you're familiar with 60th Parallel. They have an amazing Instagram page, and they go to some of the most remote locations, and we're talking like you got to go in with a bush plane, and when that plane lands and drops you off, there is no one. And chances are, too, that the weather in Alaska is so unpredictable that you can't just ring up the guy at the old airplane station and just say, hey, Bob, come pick me up. It's a very tedious process to get out there and try and beat the weather. But when you're out there, and you can maybe speak more to this, even just like a light cut, like you are cooking up dinner one night and you just get a slice on your finger from a knife, that can wind up ruining a hunt.
Absolutely.
Because that could, this is the part where you can speak more to it, but it can get infected and then all kinds of other stuff. I mean, what are some of those things that people just overlook that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's not one catastrophic event. It's like what you're saying. It's a seemingly minor injury in an austere or remote location can wreck your life. And that's exactly it. Those infections, wound care, like understanding how to properly clean a wound. And it's simple things like, use, clean water, boil water and just flush it and flush it and flush it. That's the easiest. You don't have to put it under high pressure. They actually found, at first it was like, oh yeah, high pressure washout is the way to go. But then they found out it was pushing bacteria deeper into the wound. So
really?
Yeah. So you weren't, everyone's like, oh, well, we carry a suture kit. I'm like, okay, so you're going to sew the infection in and close it up and give it an environment to grow in. So unless you clean the wound properly before you add stitches, sure, a suture kit can help you or super glue, but if you're closing up a dirty wound, you're just setting yourself up for a lot of hurt.
No bueno.
No bueno.
Yeah. Neither are good. I feel like it's a stupid question to ask. Would you rather almost keep bleeding than sew up an infection inside of?
Well, you can stop the bleeding in a wound like that, with direct pressure. Yeah.
Okay.
But closing it necessarily isn't the right idea.
Yeah.
Especially if you're going to be an extended time, I would just really irrigate it well and, try to do the best you can with a trauma dressing to keep it closed and tight. But yeah, sewing up a dirty wound is a great way to go septic.
Yeah.
And infections go fast. Especially in warm tropical places, it's just like a breeding ground for just a really bad day. So yeah, it's just, there's lots of different, we build kits that are basic just bleeding kits, all the way up to more, we have adventure kits where you're really trying to give people more options. There is the ouchie boo-boo component because what are you going to use most likely? You're going to use a Band-Aid. Blister, prevention, all those little things that
you don't need to tourniquet your finger if you do get that little nick. You can
and it's trying to teach people too. You don't need a tourniquet for every bleed.
Yeah,
I do tell people if in doubt, absolutely use the tourniquet. Because if there's a bunch of blood coming out, even you can die of venous bleeding. It takes longer than an arterial bleed. So it's your veins are returning blood to your heart.
Okay.
Your arteries are pushing it out. So the arteries are high pressure. So it's a low pressure system versus a high pressure system in your arteries. And
one way or another, you got a limited amount of blood in there if it all gets out.
And unless you're a special operations medic with units of blood at your disposal to put into somebody, you're not going to get more blood in the backcountry. The supply you have is the supply you got. So the less of it you leave on the ground, the better. It's kind of the opposite of hunting. You want a big blood trail when you're hunting for a reason, right? It's that animal's bleeding out. It's going to, expire shortly. When you're on the other end, you want all that red stuff inside of you.
Yep. What are some of the wildest things as far as hunters that you've seen proliferate out of a seemingly what would have seemed to have been not a super serious situation? You brought up earlier when we were just chatting out in the booth here, a guy just crossing a barbed wire fence.
Yeah, a guy crossed a barbed wire fence. I think he was wearing Crocs, so I don't know if he was.
Oh.
Yeah, he might have just been. I don't know what he was doing in his neighborhood, but he went to hop over the barbed wire fence and peeled all of the skin from the back of his knee to his ankle in one big flap all the way down to the muscle. So, he was just hopping over a fence and caught it and went. There was a few years ago, one of the most tragic ones that I've heard about was a college-age healthy girl in China was going rafting, and she was wearing Tevas, and she got a blister on the back of her, from the Teva, from the strap in the back on her heel.
Yeah.
Didn't take care of it, covered it up with waterproof dressing, so basically sealed it all in there. And 3 days later, had red streaks going up her leg. It had become infected, and they evacuated her to Singapore, and she died in the hospital from just a blister.
Yeah.
And so taking care of yourself, I mean...
Well, because, I can only imagine. I'm not a doctor or medic or anything, but if an infection gets in your foot, right, that, your blood gets circulated all throughout your body. So I can only imagine that the blood starts picking up the infection, and then it just starts, it's just a mega highway all the way to the rest of your body, and that infection just makes its way.
Yeah, so, taking care of your little, seemingly injured, have you ever, cleaned a fish and gotten stabbed by the spine and had your thumb?
Yeah.
And you know how painful it gets over the next couple days.
Yeah.
And that's from bacteria on that spine causing a localized, response. So it's always just taking care of yourself. If you're in the woods, if you're going on for me, I do a lot of free diving. I'm dealing with fish and sharks and all the rest, and we always have a trauma kit on the boat. But, it's all those little nicks on your hands. One thing I always do, just simple, things are, I don't wear a wedding band when I'm going back in the woods or if I'm doing anything, because I got stabbed by a spine spearfishing in Tahiti in that finger with my wedding band on, and my finger blew up so big it was excruciating.
Oh.
And it was trapped. I couldn't get the wedding band off my hand. So
that's a one-way street.
You're like, I'm either going to cut off this wedding band or I'm going to cut off my finger, one of the two. So
sorry, honey.
Yeah, it's one of those things where those silicone wedding rings make a whole lot of sense. If you want to wear one,
I just tattooed it and got it over with.
I can tattoo it. Yeah, that works too. But there's some of those wedding bands are titanium. You can't even cut them off.
Oh yeah,
and you're
I remember looking at that, and my jeweler, when we were my wife and I were thinking of getting married, my jeweler was like, you go hunting, right? And I was like, yeah. Like, you shoot guns, right? Yeah. I was like, you don't want one of these.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
So it's just little simple things, really. I mean, day in, day out, making sure that you have a first aid package that gives you the capability to deal with sprains and, traumatic bleeding. That's the core that I build around, being able to really make that intervention. But then it's thinking about, okay, well, what else could happen? If you're shooting and you're not wearing iPro, that's a bad idea. I mean, hunting is a little bit different. You're usually taking one shot,
Right.
Even then, I try to wear ballistic eyewear because, stuff happens. You get, stuff in your eyes is a real bad ticket. And
I wear a clear set of, I have some Smith sunglasses, and I put in the clear lenses. They're completely frameless around the lenses. I put those on when I walk around the woods, because the one thing that I found that kept happening to me was that in Wisconsin, our woods are so thick, and we have those dang things I can't even remember the name of, but they're those thorny, red, disgusting bushes that grab everything, and they're indestructible. And when you get stuck in those, you start looking down at the ground, you start getting all, mad and cussing at it. And then next thing you know, a tree branch comes and it gets you right in the eye.
Yep.
And I've gotten hit in the eye, and I had my eye get all red, and ended up getting out of there and flushing it out with some solution when I got home, and ended up being all right. But now I never go out without those glasses. And they don't change anything.
No, they don't change anything.
I can still see just as well as I could.
And it keeps you from a potentially debilitating injury, because stuff to your eyes is never a good thing.
As Dwight Schrute in The Office once said, the eyes are like the groin of the face.
It's absolutely true. The groin of the, just taking care of yourself when you're out there. I mean, and if you're driving around town, being aware of what's happening around you, it's just changing a little bit of perspective of just, instead of it just being all about your world and what you're doing, you're more aware of the people around you and what's happening with them as well. And I think honestly, we all need that a little bit. It's too easy to get sucked into my own myopic life on my phone and and what I'm doing. And if you can help the person next to you, that makes us better for it, right?
So one other thing that I want to ask you too, and this might be changing gears slightly, but you've talked about that a lot of this stuff you guys do at North American Rescue has been born out of the needs of special operators and military folks and things like that who are using these on the battlefield. And one interesting thing that I think, or that I've looked into and I've read up on and I've heard from some folks that I've met in that arena, is the life of one of those medics. Those guys are intense. Those guys, man, and you can go into it far better than I would be able to, but when you look at some of the training and some of the qualifications that those guys need to do just in order to have that job, to hold that title, it's incredible. I mean, they have to be the ones who go into the places that nobody else wants to go to get people out.
Yeah.
You know? And then they have to get out where other people weren't able to. So I'd be curious if you were to just touch on some of the experience you've had with these folks and some of the stuff that they have to go through and maybe shed some light on it for people who aren't as familiar.
Yeah, I've worked closely with a lot of special operations medics, ranging from pararescue side of the house over to the Green Beret, the legendary 18 Deltas, and then on the Navy side, there's the Special Amphibious Reconnaissance, SARCs, Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsmen. And those guys, the training they go through, and the Ranger medics, they get a college degree. And unfortunately, what people don't realize is when these guys leave the military, they don't even get credit for it. You know, they have to start out at
really?
like, okay, yeah, because a lot of them don't have a paramedic requirement, like a civilian paramedic requirement. The pararescue guys do, but so these guys will have years of battlefield experience saving lives, and then they get out and they're left there scratching their heads going, okay, well, I got to start from scratch. So, but they have, you know, the courses that they do on management of casualties. Right now, a big push is prolonged field care. So it's actually something that kind of falls in with those extended hunts in remote places where you just can't get out easily, and they have to sit on patients. But these are war fighters having to sit on patients past 36 hours and keep people alive.
Yeah.
So they're managing everything from airways to putting in chest tubes, and, you know, depending on what special, you know, which group they're part of, they have different capabilities, whether it's surgical interventions or... It's remarkable. I mean, I've gotten to go through a bunch of their training just to watch through it and help document it for them as a photographer, because then they can use that to help sell the training back to their commands, and show the command what they are accomplishing. And, you know, these guys are doing it without sleep. And this is just training. This isn't even downrange. So without sleep, under a lot of stress, with advanced medical procedures, doing field ultrasound.
And they're also then having to go in. So not only is that training, I can only imagine just incredibly, incredibly difficult and requires an incredible amount of smartness. I was looking for the word, and I don't think I have enough smartness to come up with the word. But they also have to go through combat training and everything as well.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I mean, an 18 Delta is being a medic, you know, in the Green Beret he's not the medical sergeant. The medicine falls after 8 other jobs, like whether it's a halo insertion and then a gun battle and mobility and all these other, you know, different qualifications that they have to attain. And then, by the way, yeah, you're setting up a clinic to treat partner force nations, families, and running that because it's hearts and minds. And then you're treating your own wounded, and you might even be treating enemy combatants, which is a whole nother mental game, because you might be fighting this guy 1 minute and then saving his life the very next because he's has intelligence that you need. I mean, our forces don't. The respect for life in our military is a little bit different, so we treat enemy combatants a little bit different than they do and how they would treat us.
Yeah.
Especially in the current kind of conflicts that we're in. So, you know, those guys have got to, you know.
That's incredible. Since you've known them, like, what kind of people are they like? What kind of person does that take? What do they all kind of have a general, like, if you met a guy and you knew he was in the military or something like that, and you just kind of hung around him for a while, could you be like, this guy, without him telling you, could you kind of know?
I peg him pretty fast.
You peg him pretty quick?
Yeah, you kind of. My little boy's always super embarrassed because I'll be standing there in a restaurant in line or something, and I'll look over and I'll be like, hey, there's some group guys. He's like, oh, no, Dad's going to go talk to these guys. And I'll walk over and be like, hey, who are you guys with? And they're like, are we that obvious? I'm like, yeah. Obviously, Most of them are very fit.
Yep.
They're type A personalities typically, but they're adventure guys. I think that helped bridge, because I'm a civilian. I have no military experience. I have a great respect and admiration for my friends that serve, and my path diverged from that route. But we have a lot in common with my background in surfing and diving and all, because those guys are all adrenaline junkies.
Yeah.
Most of them hunt, fish, love to go diving, so we're able to kind of meet in the middle, and I'm very transparent that I know nothing compared to them. I don't pretend to be someone I'm not, Yes, I played a PJ on TV one time for some dumb reason, but
really,
yeah, it was random. But, it's like, I slept at a Holiday Inn Express basically, and these guys are the real thing.
Yeah.
But they're just great Americans. I mean, they care about each other. There's definitely a difference in the set of expectations that they have for their friendships, whether you're a civilian or in the military. As a civilian, they expect you to live up to that code that they subscribe to, and that's you do whatever you say you're going to do, no excuses kind of thing. But the mill group, I have most of my best friends now are operational, and they're a great group of friends. The moment I have, we went through some crazy stuff with my family this year, and the moment the group found out what was going on, it's like, what do you need? You need us to fly down there? Do you need us to, what do you need? And that's just a different kind of response than you get out of most of your friends. I mean,
right.
Kind of like, oh, yeah, well, when it's convenient, I'll help you out. That crowd's like, okay, you need help now.
That's just in their nature.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. And getting back to some of the stuff that they're just required to do, it reminds me of, I feel like if you listen to the podcast, maybe you've heard me talk about the old track and field days. And if I've talked about it too much, then let us know. I'll stop. But I remember back in the day, it was like you'd see the decathletes, and they were always like, dude, that person's a freak. What the heck's up with that guy? He does not only one event, he does 10 events. He does them all very, very well, or she. And I feel like a lot of those dudes are kind of like the decathletes of the military.
They absolutely
it's like,
are.
You got to be shooting guns, training with other people as to how to move. You got to know how to drive the vehicles. You got to know how to then sew people up, fix people. You got to know all that strategy, and you got to be staying in shape all while doing it. How do those guys all look like
specimens?
They look, yes. That's a good way to put it. How do they find time to do all that in the middle of all their studying, all of their training, all of their... Is it just that they never sleep? Is that just the thing? They just don't sleep?
They drink a lot of Monster. Copenhagen and Monster seems to be kind of part of it. I don't know. A lot of them are just actually incredibly gifted athletes. I mean, some of these guys, you look at them and you're like, how do they move so fast? Because a lot of them aren't tiny. I mean, there's wiry little guys that are just super agile and have incredible strength that, they can just go and go and go. And then there's also dudes there that you're like, yeah, you're not going to be that fast. And then you're like, it's like an NFL linebacker. You're like, oh my gosh, they're moving that fast and they are shooting accurately. And you're just, you're kind of like, okay, I'm going to eat some humble pie.
Yep.
And you think you can keep up with them until they start moving, and then you realize, nope, not a chance. A lot of the guys that's what they do, because a lot of the stuff in the military is hurry up and wait.
Right.
So they'll go out and they're waiting around for their next mission or whatever else, and they go to the gym, and nothing's happening. They're in the gym because they know it's cheap life insurance. It's like the fitter I am, the better I can carry my load, the better I can help my buddy. If I'm not taking care of myself, then I'm a load on the team instead of being an enabler. You become, instead of an asset, you're a drawback.
Exactly.
But I think ultimately, with what we do with our social media at North American is not only celebrate those guys that are at the very tip of the spear, but we're going to inspire those guys that are just coming out of, Fort Sam Houston and 68 whiskeys. Like, they're 17, 18 years old, or 18 years old, I guess, and they're just becoming a combat medic. And you're like, hey, here's the guys at the tip of the spear, but we love you just as much.
I mean, that is incredible. For somebody at that age to be wanting to do that for their country, I mean, it's
a huge sacrifice.
It is.
And it's not, but those kids, they're hungry, they want to learn, they want to be their best, and it's awesome to see, where they end up, because all those guys at the tip of the spear started somewhere. They didn't start at the tip of the spear.
No, you're totally right. Yeah. Yeah, and I almost even now that you mentioned that too, I backtrack a little bit because everybody likes to ask about the dudes, like you said, at the tip of the spear, and gals, if they're there. But yeah, it's easy to then have people that are just in there starting out and getting going, and like you said, they're hungry. It's easy to accidentally overlook them, maybe, but they shouldn't be overlooked.
No, you want to inspire those guys, and that's what I try to do is help with the education, like plant the seed of, hey, maybe I can do that. Yeah. And then and give them that, like, okay, yeah, I want to get more education. It's the same thing with, whether it's Stop the Bleed with civilians. Like, I get so many messages from kids that say, hey, I got my EMT basic, and now I'm going to enlist in the Army, or I want to be a pararescue, and I want to do these different things. And the biggest thing I tell them is, look, just don't let someone tell you can't. And I tell that to my little boy all the time. Dude, it's your mindset, like, the moment you tell me you can't do something, what are the odds are you're going to do it? Pretty slim to none. But, just changing that attitude to I can't to, well, it might be hard, but I want to try. Just little adjustments. And if I can inspire those people through the social media, then that's awesome job, satisfaction, because you see these kids go on to do so much with their lives. And did I make that kid do that? No. But did I help maybe inspire him for a hot second? Or make them feel good when they send in a question to actually respond to them and be like, hey, look, I just went and talked to the surgeon of, one of our Tier 1 units, and he said to try this. And, kids gets,
Yeah, that's cool.
So it's a very rewarding kind of area to work in because dramatically, it touches people's lives in a place where, you're celebrating what people are doing that, keeps other people living. I mean, that's pretty rad.
Yeah. What do you say here? I know we got to make sure that you get on your way to all the other stuff that you got going on. The one thing that we do is we do last calls, and it looks like we weren't able to grab Mark, but that's just fine. Mark usually has about 10 or 20 last calls, so we'd be here for another 30 or 45 minutes. But yeah, so basically anything to summarize up, anything maybe if you felt like we didn't quite get to anything too, just because as a host in this particular topic, I'll admit that I am not super well versed, and there very well may be people out there listening and you're just yelling at me because I didn't ask a really good question that you're thinking of in your head, but maybe you've got some other stuff that on your mind that might be good to throw out there.
Well,
go for it.
Definitely check us out. Instagram is North American Rescue is the call sign for us, and just be prepared. There will be shocking posts. I have to be careful around my kids with when I'm working, that they don't see the computer screen sometimes, but I try to not bombard you with it. And we really hope, check out the National Stop the Bleed Month. They're on social media as well, and they're doing awesome work with education. That's coming up in May. Really would encourage people to, whether you're a mom, a dad, a high school student, whether you're an outdoorsman or not, to check with your local community college or fire department, find a class and take it. And then if you're inspired to buy product, obviously, we can help you there. But the big thing is getting that education and empowering yourself so that if something bad does happen, you're able to be helpful and save somebody's life, or just put a Band-Aid on if that's what's required. Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah.
In my little girl's life, putting a Band-Aid on sometimes is basically the same thing as saving her life,
Yeah. Not only did it stop the bleeding or prevent infection in the wound, but Band-Aids on little ones oftentimes are basically like a caffeine boost. It's like
pretty much
makes the whole day. Yeah. Something to tell their friends about, show and tell.
If it has a cartoon character on there, so they might just wear it for jewelry, but as long as they stop crying, it's a win.
That is. That's awesome.
But thank you so much for having me on. I hope that it's something of interest to everybody out there listening, and feel free to reach out with more questions that you might have through our social media, and I will do my best to respond. And if I don't have the answer, I'm very good at telemedicine. That's what I tell people. I will find someone that is a very qualified provider to provide that answer. It's not going to be me giving you medical advice, because that's just not my lane. There you go. All right. Well, cool. Well, we appreciate you coming on. And for my last call, I will say, I'm going to reiterate something I said before that I guess it occurred to me almost while talking here, is for those out there, like I said, who concealed carry,
you said it. If you're prepared to make a hole, you better be prepared to patch a hole. But then also the mentality of folks who do concealed carry and the reasons that they concealed carry. I think of myself, like when I go to certain places, like you mentioned, these tragic shootings that have happened. Some of the locations that they happen at are like a church or a movie theater or something like that. And I think to myself, I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I'm just enjoying life, all's going well. Somebody tries to ruin that, and I'm not prepared. And you can have the weapon side as far as the defensive side down, but at some point or another, you may have to deal with the reactionary, traumatic, caring, I don't even know the word, side of things where just something did happen.
Helping keep somebody alive.
Exactly. And I think that, it's not like I'm walking around every corner thinking that some bad dude's going to jump out and shoot me in the face or something like that. But I do like to be prepared just for whatever might happen. Because life is crazy. It's a crazy world we live in. So that's my soapbox speech for my...
It's about being a good Samaritan.
Yeah,
just
it is.
Being ready to help fellow American, fellow friend, wherever you are. Just being able to be a difference in somebody's life.
True that. Well, like we said, thanks again, everybody, for listening. If you have any questions, direct them on over to North American Rescue, or you can hit us up on Instagram too. But as you've maybe gathered from my questions and things, I will be able to give you zero input. Anyway, thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time. As always, shoot out any other ideas for podcast topics that you might want to hear too, and we're always open to hearing those. We'll see you next time. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. Leave us a review or comment down below. We want to hear what you have to say about the show, maybe what you like, maybe what you didn't like, so that way we can make these podcasts as good as they can be. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'll be posting about each episode released, so that way you can go back, find these things, maybe grab a little nugget of information that you could take with you to the range, out in the field, or maybe to the kitchen if we're talking about some good food. So, again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.